Part 2. The Book of Causation, Nidanavagga. Homage to the Blessed One, the Arahant, the perfectly enlightened one. Introduction. The Nidanavagga, the Book of Causation, is named after its first Samyutta, one of the deep royal Samyuttas setting forth the radical philosophical vision of early Buddhism. The Vagga contains 10 Samyuttas, of which the first takes up almost half the volume. The other 9 deal with less weighty topics, though it is possible the Dhatu Samyutta, which is also devoted to the first principles of Buddhist phenomenology, was intentionally included in the Vagga as a junior partner to the Nidana Samyutta. While this hypothesis must remain unconfirmable, what is beyond doubt is that with this Vagga we enter upon a very different terrain from that traversed in the Sagatha Vagga, a terrain where precise philosophical exposition takes priority over literary grace, inspirational charm, and moral edification. Having used the expression precise philosophical exposition, however, I must at once qualify it in 2 respects. First, the word philosophical applies to the contents of these Samyuttas only in the sense that they articulate a body of first principles which disclose the deep underlying structures of actuality, not in the sense that they set out to construct a systematic edifice of thought whose primary appeal is to the intellect. Their disclosures always take place within the framework laid out by the 4 Noble Truths, which makes it clear that their primary intent is pragmatic, directed towards the cessation of suffering. They are expounded not to delineate an intellectually satisfying system of ideas, but to make known those aspects of actuality, deep and hidden, that must be penetrated by wisdom to eradicate the ignorance at the bottom of existential suffering. The suttas are guidelines to seeing and understanding, signposts pointing to what one must see for oneself with direct insight. To regard their themes as topics for intellectual entertainment and argumentation is to miss the point. Second, when I use the word exposition, this should not arouse expectations that the suttas are going to provide us with thorough, systematic, logically progressive treatises of the type we find in the history of Western philosophy. Far to the contrary, what we are presented with is a virtual mosaic of reconnaissance photographs laying bare a landscape that is strange but uncannily familiar. The landscape, ultimately, is our own personal experience, seen in depth and with microscopic precision. Each sutta shows up this landscape from a distinctive angle. Like any photo, the picture given by a single sutta is necessarily limited, taken from a single standpoint, and with a narrow point of focus. But in its capacity for revelation, it can be stark and powerful. To make sense of the multiple shots offered by the suttas, following one another with hardly a hair's breadth of logical order, we must reshuffle them many times, ponder them deeply, and investigate them closely with wisdom. To arrive at the total picture, or at least at a fuller picture than we possess when we approach the texts in a cursory way, we must consider the suttas in a given Samyutta in their totality, compare them with parallel discourses in other Samyuttas, and then try to fit them together, like the pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, into a coherent whole. This is about as far from systematic exposition as one can get, for the purpose is not to gratify the intellect with a fully articulated system, but to awaken insight. And such an aim requires a methodology of its own. Chapter 1. 12. Nidana Samyutta, Connected Discourses on Causation. Introduction. The Nidana Samyutta collects into one chapter of 9 Vaggas 93 short suttas concerned with dependent origination, paticca samuppada. This chapter might have even been named the Paticca Samuppada Samyutta, but the compilers of the canon must have considered such a title too unwieldy and settled upon a more concise designation for it. The word Nidana means cause or source, and is sometimes used in a chain of synonyms that includes hetu, samudaya, and pachaya, cause, origin, condition. The word gives its name to the longest sutta in the Nikayas on Paticca the Mahanidana Sutta, Digha Nikaya number 15. Dependent origination is one of the central teachings of early Buddhism, so vital to the teaching as a whole that the Buddha is quoted elsewhere as saying, "One who sees dependent origination sees the Dhamma, and one who sees the Dhamma sees dependent origination." The ultimate purpose of the teaching on dependent origination is to expose the conditions that sustain the round of rebirths, samsara, so as to show what must be done to gain release from the round. Existence within samsara is suffering and bondage, dukkha, and hence the ending of suffering requires deliverance from the round. To win deliverance is a matter of unraveling the causal pattern that underlies our bondage, a process that begins with understanding the causal pattern itself. It is dependent origination that defines this causal pattern. Dependent origination is usually expounded in a sequence of 12 factors joined into a chain of 11 propositions. In the Nidana Samyutta, this formula is cited many times. It is expounded in two orders, by way of origination, called anuloma or forward sequence, and by way of cessation, called patiloma or reverse sequence. Sometimes the presentation proceeds from the first factor to the last, sometimes it begins at the end and traces the chain of conditions back to the first. Other suttas pick up the chain somewhere in the middle and work either backwards or forwards. We find the bare formula in the first sutta, with formal definitions of the 12 factors in the analysis of dependent origination in the second. The whole formula, in turn, exemplifies an abstract structural principle of conditionality. When this exists, that comes to be. With the arising of this, that arises. When this does not exist, that does not come to be. With the cessation of this, that ceases. This structural principle can be given different applications than those found in the formula of dependent origination, and indeed underlies almost every aspect of the Buddha's teaching, from his ideas about social reformation to his outline of the path to Nibbana. To hope to find in the Nidana Samyutta a clear explanation of the sequence of conditions, as we might expect from a modern textbook on the subject, is to court disappointment. The formula preserved in the texts is stripped to the bone, perhaps serving as a mnemonic device, and it seems likely that the original expositions on the topic were fleshed out with elaborations that were not recorded in the suttas, but were transmitted orally within the lineage of teachers. Because the texts lack a clear-cut explanation of the formula, modern interpreters of early Buddhism have sometimes devised capricious theories about its original meaning, theories which assume that the Buddhist tradition itself has muddled up the interpretation of this most basic Buddhist doctrine. To avoid the arbitrariness and willfulness of personal opinion, it seems more prudent to rely on the method of explanation found in the Buddhist exegetical tradition, which, despite minor differences in details, is largely the same across the spectrum of early Buddhist schools. Here, I will give only a concise summary of the interpretation offered by the Pali tradition. Because of 1. Ignorance, avidya, lack of direct knowledge of the Four Noble Truths, a person engages in volitional actions, wholesome and unwholesome activities of body, speech, and mind. These are 2. The volitional formations, sankhara, in other words, karma. The volitional formations sustain consciousness from one life to the next and determine where it re-arises. In this way, volitional formations condition 3. consciousness, vijnana. Along with consciousness, beginning with the moment of conception, comes 4, name and form, nama rupa. The sentient organism with its physical form, rupa, and its sensitive and cognitive capacities, nama. The sentient organism is equipped with 5, 6 sense bases, salayatana, the 5 physical sense faculties and the mind as organ of cognition. The sense bases allow 6, contact, phassa, to occur between consciousness and its objects, and contact conditions 7, feeling, vedana, called into play by feeling, 8, craving, tanha, arises. And when craving intensifies, it gives rise to 9, clinging, upadana, tight attachment to the objects of desire through sensuality and wrong views. Impelled by one's attachments, one again engages in volitional actions pregnant with 10, a new existence, bhava. At death, this potential for new existence is actualized in a new life beginning with 11, birth, jati, and ending in 12, aging and death, maranjara marana. From this, we can see that the traditional interpretation regards the 12 factors as spread out over a span of 3 lives, with ignorance and volitional formations pertaining to the past, birth and aging and death to the future, and the intermediate factors to the present. The segment from consciousness through feeling is the resultant phase of the present, the phase resulting from past ignorance and karma. The segment from craving through active existence is the karmically creative phase of the present, leading to renewed existence in the future. Existence is distinguished into 2 phases. One, called karma existence, belongs to the causal phase of the present. The other, called rebirth existence, belongs to the resultant phase of the future. The 12 factors are also distributed into 3 rounds. The round of defilements includes ignorance, craving, and clinging. The round of action includes volitional formations and karma existence. All the other factors belong to the round of results. Defilements give rise to defiled actions, actions bring forth results, and results serve as the soil for more defilements. In this way, the round of rebirths revolves without discernible beginning. This method of dividing up the factors should not be misconstrued to mean that the past, present, and future factors are mutually exclusive. The distribution into 3 lives is only an expository device which, for the sake of concision, has to resort to abstraction and oversimplification. As many of the suttas in the Nidanavagga show, in their dynamic operation, groups of factors separated in the formula inevitably become intertwined. Thus, whenever there is ignorance, then craving and clinging invariably come along. And whenever there is craving and clinging, then ignorance stands behind them. We might regard the 12 factors as composed of 2 parallel series defining a single process, the conditioned regeneration of samsara from within itself, but doing so from complementary angles. The first series treats ignorance as the root and shows how ignorance leads to karmic activity, i.e., the volitional formations, and thence to a new existence consisting in the interplay of consciousness and name and form. The second series makes craving the root and shows how craving leads to clinging and karmic activity, i.e., active existence, and thence to the production of a new existence that begins with birth and ends in aging and death. To join the 2 segments, the factors within name and form from which craving arises must be drawn out, and thus we get the 3 links, the 6 sense bases, contact, and feeling. The 3-life interpretation of dependent origination has sometimes been branded a commentarial invention on the ground that the suttas themselves do not divide the terms up into different lifetimes. However, while it is true that we do not find in the suttas an explicit distribution of the factors into 3 lives, close examination of the variants on the standard formula lends strong support to the 3-life interpretation. One example is Sutta 19, where ignorance and craving are first assigned jointly to a past life, giving rise to a new life lived in a conscious body with its 6 sense bases. And then, in the case of the fool, but not the wise man, ignorance and craving again function as joint causes in the present life to bring about renewed birth and suffering in the future life. A close examination of other variants in this Samyutta would also establish that the series of terms extends over several lives. The opening Vagga calls immediate attention to the importance of dependent origination, with a string of suttas showing how the 7 Buddhas of the past, ending in our Buddha Gautama, attained perfect enlightenment by awakening to dependent origination, the eye-opening discovery that ended their long search for the light of wisdom. Later, the Buddha gives a more detailed account of his own awakening to dependent origination, where he illustrates his discovery of the Noble Eightfold Path with the beautiful parable of the ancient city. According to Sutta 20, the causal connections between the factors operate whether or not Buddhas arise. They are the persistent, stable, invariable laws of actuality. The task of a Tathagata is to discover them, fathom them thoroughly, and then proclaim them to the world. The invariability of the causal law and the regularity in the arising of perfectly enlightened Buddhas are thus joined into a single order, ultimately identical with the Dhamma itself. Several suttas show that dependent origination served the Buddha as a teaching by the middle, enabling him to steer clear of the 2 extreme views about the human condition that have polarized reflective thought through the centuries. One is the metaphysical thesis of eternalism, which posits a permanent self as the underlying ground of personal existence, a self which, in classical Indian thought, transmigrates from one life to the next while retaining its individual identity. The other extreme is annihilationism, which holds that the individual can be reduced to the phenomenal personality and that at death, with the dissolution of the body, the person is entirely cut off and annihilated. Both extremes pose insuperable problems, for the one encourages an obstinate clinging to the conditions out of which suffering arises, while the other threatens to undermine ethics and to make suffering inexplicable except as the product of chance. Dependent origination offers a new perspective which rises above the extremes. The teaching shows individual existence to be constituted by a current of conditioned phenomena which is devoid of a metaphysical self, yet which continues from life to life as long as the causes that sustain it remain efficacious. Thereby, dependent origination offers a meaningful explanation of the problem of suffering, which avoids, on the one hand, the philosophical conundrums posed by the hypothesis of a permanent self, and on the other, the dangers of ethical anarchy posed by annihilationism. As long as ignorance and craving remain, the round of rebirths continues on. Karma yields its pleasant and painful fruit, and the great mass of suffering accumulates. With their removal, and only with their removal, can a complete end be made to the whole round of samsaric suffering. The most elegant exposition of dependent origination as the middle teaching is without doubt the famous Kaccana-Gota Sutta, Sutta 15, in which the Buddha holds up this principle as an alternative to the extremes of existence and non-existence. Dependent origination provides the key for understanding the arising of suffering as well as pleasure and pain. In Suttas 17 and 18, see 2 Suttas 24 to 26. And again for cutting through a variety of philosophical antinomies adopted by the thinkers of his era in Suttas 46 to 48. Though the 12-factored formula of dependent origination is the most common expression of the doctrine, the Nidana Samyutta introduces a number of little-known variants that help to illuminate the standard version. One, in Sutta 65, is a 10-factored variant in which ignorance and volitional formations are omitted, and consciousness and name and form become mutually dependent. This is illustrated by the simile of two sheaves of reeds, which support each other and collapse when either is withdrawn, in Sutta 67. An interesting sequence of three texts, Suttas 38 to 40, speaks about the conditions for the maintenance of consciousness. That is, how consciousness passes on to a new existence. The causes are said to be the underlying tendencies, i.e., ignorance and craving, and what one intends and plans, i.e., one's volitional activities. Once consciousness becomes established, the production of a new existence begins, thus showing that we can proceed directly from consciousness, the usual third factor, to existence, the usual 10th factor. These variants make it plain that the sequence of factors should not be regarded as a linear causal process in which each preceding factor gives rise to its successor through the simple exercise of efficient causality. The relationship among the factors is always one of complex conditionality rather than linear causation. The conditioning function can include such diverse relations as mutuality, when two factors mutually support each other, necessary antecedents, when one factor must be present for another to arise, distal efficiency, as when a remotely past volitional formation generates consciousness in a new life, etc. Moreover, by contemplating a number of variant texts side by side, we can see that at selected points in the series, the links loop back in ways that reinforce the complexity of the process. Thus, while consciousness precedes the 6 sense bases in the usual formula, in Suttas 43 and 44, the 6 sense bases are shown to be conditions for consciousness. While consciousness normally precedes craving, Sutta 64 makes craving, with lust and delight, the condition for the continuation of consciousness, and volitional formations the condition for existence. The positive and negative sequences of dependent origination are expanded definitions of the second and third of the Four Noble Truths, as shown by the variant at Sutta 43. From the 6 internal and external sense bases, as we just saw, consciousness arises. And this is followed by contact, feeling, and craving, which is then declared to be the origin of suffering. When craving is abandoned, suffering stops. The next sutta, number 44, employs a similar pattern to explain the origin and passing away of the world. This reveals dependent origination to be not a remote and inaccessible metaphysical law, but a process perpetually underpinning our own everyday sensory experience, activated by our responses to the feelings arisen at the 6 sense bases. As Suttas 52 to 60 show, when attention to the objects of perception is driven by a thirst for gratification, craving is intensified, and this builds up another round of suffering. But when one learns to discern the danger in the objects of clinging, craving ceases, bringing the subsequent factors to a standstill. In several suttas, the formula for dependent origination is integrated with another doctrinal paradigm, that of the 4 nutriments. These are the 4 strong supports for sentient existence, namely edible food for the body, contact for feeling, mental volition for the production of renewed existence, and consciousness for name and form. The ideas of nutrition and conditionality closely correspond, both implying the contingency and insubstantiality of all phenomena of existence. Hence, it is natural for the formula of the 4 nutriments to be grafted onto an exposition of dependent origination. In Sutta 12, in relation to the nutriments, the Buddha repeatedly rejects questions that imply the presence of a substantial subject or agent behind the process of experience. The conditioning factors themselves constitute the ongoing flow of experience, with no need to posit a permanent self as the someone at the receiving end of feeling and perception, or at the instigating end of action. Sutta 63, entirely devoted to the four nutriments with no explicit mention made of dependent origination, introduces four thought-provoking similes to expose the dangers in the four nutriments and to inspire a sense of revulsion towards the whole process of nutrition. Because at least three of the four nutriments are internal to the sentient organism itself, the teaching of the four nutriments implies, at a very deep level, that sentient existence not only requires nutriment from outside, but is itself a self-sustaining process of nutrition. One variant in this Samyutta stands in a class of its own. This is the short but pithy Upanisa Sutta, number 23, which shows that the same principle of conditionality that underlies the movement of samsara also undergirds the path to liberation. Each stage of the path arises with its predecessor as a condition or proximate cause, all the way from the initial act of faith to the final knowledge of deliverance. This presentation of the doctrine has sometimes been called transcendental dependent origination. Since the round is propelled by craving, and craving is nurtured by ignorance, to break the forward movement of the series, ignorance must be replaced by knowledge. With the removal of ignorance, all the factors that flow from it, craving, clinging, and kamic activity, come to a halt, bringing to an end the round of rebirths with all its attendant suffering. From one angle, as is often shown in the Nidana Samyutta, ignorance means not knowing the dependently arisen phenomena, their origin, their cessation, and the way to their cessation. Thus, the ignorance at the head of the causal series, the ignorance which sustains the forward movement of dependent origination, is nothing other than ignorance about dependent origination itself. From this, it follows that the knowledge needed to bring dependent origination to a stop is just knowledge of how dependent origination works. Several important suttas in the Nidana Samyutta make it clear that dependent origination is not merely an explanatory principle to be accepted on trust, but an essential component of the knowledge needed to reach the end of suffering. Often the Buddha states that the connections among the factors are to be directly known, both by way of origination and by way of cessation. They are thus not merely aspects of theory, but the content of intuitive insight. To gain this knowledge is to acquire the right view of a noble disciple who has personally seen the truth of the Dhamma and entered the path of a trainee, one bound to reach the deathless in 7 more lives at most, without ever falling away. Direct knowledge of dependent origination is not the unique mark of the Arahant, a widespread misconception, but an achievement already reached by the stream enterer on making the breakthrough to the Dhamma. The noble disciple's knowledge of dependent origination has 2 aspects. One is a direct perception of the relationships between each pair of factors in the present. The other, an inferential knowledge that this fixed order of phenomena holds invariably in the past and future, so that anyone who comprehends dependent origination must comprehend it in exactly the same way that the noble disciple has comprehended it. Once the stream enterer gains this knowledge, attainment of the final goal is irrevocably assured, as is clear from Sutta 41 and elsewhere. Towards the end of this Samyutta, in Sutta 70, we read the story of the wanderer Susima, who entered the order as a thief of Dhamma, intending to learn the Buddha's teaching to gain advantages for his own company of followers. On being subjected to a catechism by the Buddha on the 5 aggregates and dependent origination, he underwent a genuine change of heart and confessed his evil intentions. This sutta introduces a class of arahants described as liberated by wisdom, who have won the final goal by understanding the Dhamma without gaining the supernormal powers or the formless meditations. The sutta also makes it clear that knowledge of the true nature of phenomena, i.e., of the five aggregates and dependent origination, precedes knowledge of Nibbana. The Nidana Samyutta closes with two vaggas, groups of suttas, cast as repetition series. Vagga 8, suttas 71 to 81, applies the fourth truth template of the ascetics and Brahmins paradigm to each factor of the standard formula, excluding ignorance, implicitly included as the condition for volitional formations. Vagga 9, suttas 82 to 93, is an incorporated repetition series because each sutta incorporates all 11 factors, along with their conditions, into an abbreviated text. It is thus implied that each sutta could be unpacked by taking each factor with its condition as the subject of a separate sutta, so that the total number of suttas in the Vagga would increase from 12 to 132. Vagga 1. The Buddhas. Sutta 1. Dependent Origination. Thus have I heard. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Savatthi in Jeta's Grove, Anathapindika's park. There the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus thus, Bhikkhus. Venerable Sir, those bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this, Bhikkhus, I will teach you dependent origination. Listen to that, and attend closely. I will speak. Yes, Venerable Sir, those bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this, and what, bhikkhus, is dependent origination? With ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be. With volitional formations as condition, consciousness. With consciousness as condition, name and form. With name and form as condition, the 6 sense spaces. With the 6 sense spaces as condition, contact. With contact as condition, feeling. With feeling as condition, craving. With craving as condition, clinging. With clinging as condition, existence. With existence as condition, birth. With birth as condition, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair come to be. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. This, bhikkhus, is called dependent origination. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes cessation of volitional formations. With the cessation of volitional formations, cessation of consciousness. With the cessation of consciousness, cessation of name and form. With the cessation of name and form, cessation of the 6 sense spaces. With the cessation of the 6 sense spaces, cessation of contact. With the cessation of contact, cessation of feeling. With the cessation of feeling, cessation of craving. With the cessation of craving, cessation of clinging. With the cessation of clinging, cessation of existence. With the cessation of existence, cessation of birth. With the cessation of birth, aging and death, sorrow, lamentation, pain, displeasure, and despair cease. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. This is what the Blessed One said. Elated, those bhikkhus delighted in the Blessed One's statement. Sutta 2. Analysis of dependent origination. At Savatthi. Bhikkhus, I will teach you dependent origination, and I will analyze it for you. Listen to that and attend closely. I will speak. Yes, Venerable Sir, those bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this. And what, bhikkhus, is dependent origination? With ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be, with volitional formations, consciousness, and so on, as in the preceding sutta. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. And what, bhikkhus, is aging and death? The aging of the various beings in the various orders of beings, their growing old, brokenness of teeth, greyness of hair, wrinkling of skin, decline of vitality, degeneration of the faculties. This is called aging. The passing away of the various beings from the various orders of beings, their perishing, break-up, disappearance, mortality, death, completion of time, the break-up of the aggregates, the laying down of the carcass. This is called death. Thus, this aging and this death are together called aging and death. And what, bhikkhus, is birth? The birth of the various beings into the various orders of beings, their being born, descent into the womb, production, the manifestation of the aggregates, the obtaining of the sense bases. This is called birth. And what, bhikkhus, is existence? There are these three kinds of existence: sense sphere existence, form sphere existence, formless sphere existence. This is called existence. And what, bhikkhus, is clinging? There are these four kinds of clinging: clinging to sensual pleasures, clinging to views, clinging to rules and vows, clinging to a doctrine of self. This is called clinging. And what, bhikkhus, is craving? There are these 6 classes of craving: craving for forms, craving for sounds, craving for odours, craving for tastes, craving for tactile objects, craving for mental phenomena. This is called craving. And what, bhikkhus, is feeling? There are these 6 classes of feeling: feeling born of eye contact, feeling born of ear contact, feeling born of nose contact, feeling born of tongue contact, feeling born of body contact, feeling born of mind contact. This is called feeling. And what, bhikkhus, is contact? There are these 6 classes of contact: eye contact, ear contact, nose contact, tongue contact, body contact, mind contact. This is called contact. And what, bhikkhus, are the 6 sense bases? The eye base, the ear base, the nose base, the tongue base, the body base, the mind base. These are called the 6 sense bases. And what, bhikkhus, is name and form? Feeling, perception, volition, contact, attention. This is called name. The 4 great elements and the form derived from the 4 great elements. This is called form. Thus, this name and this form are together called name and form. And what, bhikkhus, is consciousness? There are these 6 classes of consciousness: eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, mind consciousness. This is called consciousness. And what, bhikkhus, are the volitional formations? There are these 3 kinds of volitional formations: the bodily volitional formation, the verbal volitional formation, the mental volitional formation. These are called the volitional formations. And what, bhikkhus, is ignorance? Not knowing suffering, not knowing the origin of suffering, not knowing the cessation of suffering, not knowing the way leading to the cessation of suffering. This is called ignorance. Thus, bhikkhus, with ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be. With volitional formations as condition, consciousness comes to be, and so on. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. But with the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes cessation of volitional formations. With the cessation of volitional formations, cessation of consciousness, and so on. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. Sutta 3. The Two Ways. at Savatthi. Bhikkhus, I will teach you the wrong way and the right way. Listen to that and attend closely. I will speak. Yes, Venerable Sir, those bhikkhus replied. The Blessed One said this. And what, bhikkhus, is the wrong way? With ignorance as condition, volitional formations come to be. With volitional formations as condition, consciousness comes to be, and so on. Such is the origin of this whole mass of suffering. This, bhikkhus, is called the wrong way. And what, bhikkhus, is the right way? With the remainderless fading away and cessation of ignorance comes cessation of volitional formations. With the cessation of volitional formations, cessation of consciousness, and so on. Such is the cessation of this whole mass of suffering. This, bhikkhus, is called the right way.